When I was 12, I found a skateboard. I tried to get on it.
Without doubt, he is developing
And it shot right out from underneath me.
Without doubt, he has.
Wait, how did you get the scar? I fell.
And without doubt, for 30 years, he has been trying to acquire a nuclear weapon.
The usual scrutiny of these kind of guys was just not done adequately. There was this attitude of let's find the smoking gun, let's find the evidence, rather than let's look at what's out there and weigh the evidence.
They wanted to believe it. It goes back to contacts that originated as early as the 1990s.
I did myself.
With individuals like Dick Cheney, like Paul Wolfowitz, like Richard Pearl, dealing with Ahmed Chalabi. We became enamored of this fellow who dressed like a Westerner, talked with a British accent, and appeared to be upper crust, and therefore was quite believable.
And everyone in Washington was believing them. And I thought people had really checked out of reality in order to go to war. That it was a war fever that had taken over.
These people wanted to get back into Baghdad. They couldn't defeat Saddam Hussein, but they knew that U.S. military
healed with a ring
so the worst of these offenses
up teeth marks and cysts.
Ow!
Fuck
who's
you.
been in exile from his own country.
Hey! I told you a real fucking story. I did tell you a real fucking story. Oh, you want a bite mark?
To his own people, sold the Pentagon on the idea that Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction and he must be stopped.
Just stay there, okay? Just wait, please. What? Just turn around. What are you doing?
They were looking for money, first of all, because Charlie was paying money.
You're supposed to be on patrol.
There's a blizzard outside.
Is that we?
But there was no
Why are you here?
People are counting on you. You get that? What we do matters.
Well, then why aren't you at the fucking lookout?
Because Tommy and Joel didn't show up.
Or at least self-serving in the...
What do you mean?
The U.S. Congress
We waited for them for an hour.
Appropriate money.
I was looking for their horses when I saw lights.
Congress of no telling how much they were taking off the top.
Maybe they just went back to town.
You get all kinds of people who want a reward and have nothing to offer. And many
How much of their region have you covered?
Because they would believe anything.
I'm not sure.
Then we split up.
It was phony.
Go at it from different sides. We can cover the whole thing in a few hours.
I don't like you writing solo. We don't know what's out there.
Exactly. What if they need help?
These people could then take over.
Okay, I'll head west. Dina can take south. You come from the east, but be smart about it, yeah?
Just the role that detectors played throughout the entire inspection process.
Inspections were. Then you don't overthrow Saddam Hussein.
How is somebody like that? I don't know.
We're good. Thanks.
Yeah.
I stand before this assembly as a representative of free Iraq.
No, it's
To all those here who helped us in our struggle for liberation, we extend our gratitude.
The Iraqi opposition
You want nothing.
You have no idea.
continuation of its
Don't get electricity.
and to re-establish democracy and the rule of law.
I got what I want.
How long y'all
I
been
got
here?
my war. I'm back in Iraq.
Since yesterday.
You people
Yes, sir.
provide on my
Yep.
What are y'all doing out this way? Just passing through. You two live nearby?
We do. A few hours down the hill. Y'all should come back with us, restock before you head out.
Appreciate it. I'm Mel, by the way.
Tommy, this is my brother.
Joe.
Every year, by law and by custom, we meet here to consider the state of the union.
That looked like you heard of us or something.
Chamber deeply aware of decisive days
Because they have.
that
Tommy! Get off me! Get off me!
Inspectors and journalists who were deeply involved in the 1990s. Well, if you made it 12 years ago, and we have a shelf life of 2 months, it may not be safe to drink, but it isn't sarin gas anymore. And there's no way the agency could not have known.
U.S. intelligence indicates that Saddam Hussein had upwards of 30,000 munitions capable of delivering chemical agents.
Why don't you say whatever speech you got rehearsed?
16.
Get this over with.
Despite Iraq's recent declaration denying their existence.
And then they tried to use the fact that inspectors found 16 of these as evidence that thousands more existed. And again, I mean, as a methodology, it's a very weak way to predict anything. And I think that it borders on propaganda to argue that there's a small number that found.
Don't you fucking...
In this case, over 29.
God!
Saddam Hussein is not accountable for 29.
The Bush administration officials
Clear out.
said, the impression that if Iraq had not fully accounted for all of a certain items related to chemical or biological weapons, then it must be there. And that's not at all what the inspectors said or found.
Stupid. Old man.
He's given new evidence that he is destroyed.
Inspectors go
You don't get to rush this.
That's said in that way, but these others we can't prove it, and that doesn't mean that they didn't destroy these warheads or whatever the other.
Joel! Tommy!
That he had been so intimidated by the UN inspection and sanctions.
How do I get down there?
And given up all that, they probably got
Saddam Hussein had material sufficient for more than 38,000 liters of botulinum toxin.
Okay, Shimmer.
Enough to subject millions of people to death by respiratory failure. He hadn't accounted for that material.
The weapons program line toxin, and therefore it was an issue. But again, it doesn't mean that
Joel! Tommy!
evidence that they possess them.
Joel!
Sources tell us that he has attempted to purchase high-strength aluminum tubes suitable for nuclear weapons production.
I think there was very little doubt that the centrifuge tubes, so-called, were nothing but rocket motor tubes to go into ME-1 style artillery rockets. They certainly have all the specs for that.
Nuclear experts, for instance, from Lawrence Livermore's laboratories, D Division, experts on centrifuge enrichment,
Joel?
came out and said,
Tommy?
"You shouldn't enrich uranium using these tubes. They're not compatible."
Well, I saw it as a deliberate attempt to take information and selectively take information and try to basically say that Iraq poses an imminent nuclear threat and therefore action is absolutely necessary. And I felt that was absolutely wrong.
The International Atomic Energy Agency found in the 1990s that Saddam Hussein had an advanced nuclear weapons development program.
Administration showed photos of nuclear or former nuclear weapon sites in Iraq, pre-1991 nuclear weapon sites, claimed that new construction showed they were ongoing nuclear weapons production sites. Complete nonsense.
The most troubling thing about the fact of distortions and misleading statements which gave it is a federal felony. Misleading important
Get it down! Get off me! Get her hand! Get the fuck off me!
Okay?
You're gonna fucking die!
What's going on?
Let him go!
Who is that?
Let him go!
Why aren't you posted up outside?
We didn't think anyone was gonna show up.
What the hell did you expect? We gotta get out of here before the whole town's on top of us.
Georgia Lieutenant asked that this be taken
You're
out
done.
of the Cincinnati speech.
You want what I want, right?
To Yellowcake.
And it.
It was taken out of the
Now.
Cincinnati speech because whenever the director of Central Intelligence wants something out, it's gone.
How do you get back in?
It's not a matter of getting back in. It's a
Joel,
matter of taking 3+
get up.
months later.
Joel, fucking get up.
I didn't remember that George Tenet had asked them to
Please stop.
Cincinnati speech, and then it was cleared by the agency.
Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up. No!
British government responded to Saddam Hussein recently sought significant compliance with Iranian.
Just 16 words in the State of the Union address. Yes, now know this leader, a retired career diplomat, joined one demonstration of just that nearly a year before the speech.
I received a call from the CIA in February 2002. I was invited out to talk to those people within the broader intelligence community who deal with three hot subjects: Iraq, uranium, and Niger. I briefed them on what I knew about the uranium business. During the course of that briefing, they said that they had received a report that was of a purported memorandum of agreement authorizing the sale of uranium yellowcake, somewhat enriched uranium, from Niger to Iran, and it was a document that was executed by the government of Niger. They asked me if I would be willing to go out and take a look at it and talk to the
Jesse! They're down here!
I left there and tell them that they wanted I would be able to free up my schedule. They subsequently called me and said, please do. I spent the 8 days there drinking mint tea and talking to everybody there was to talk to, who knew anything about the subject matter in that evening. And I've come back persuaded that one, from a business perspective, because of the political and social structure, you just couldn't do it. Not a lot of people do it. And two, the way the government bureaucracy was structured, you could not make the decision without a lot of people knowing. And if you made the decision would be reflected in a series of signatures on the documents. And if the documents did not contain those signatures, they could not be authentic government of Niger documents.
The president quoted a British paper. We did not know at the time. No one knew at the time in our circles. Maybe someone knew down in the bowels of the agency, but no one in our circles knew that there were doubts and suspicions that this might be a forgery. Of course, it was information that was mistaken, but it was a relatively small part of the case about nuclear weapons and nuclear reconstitution. It is also the case that the broad picture about Iraq's programs was a picture that went very far back in time.
Now, given what I knew about where the question had originated, and given what I knew about the way the government works, I knew that people did know.
Based on thorough analysis, the IA has concluded,
She can't stop us.
with the concurrence of outside experts, that these documents, which form the basis for the report of recent uranium transaction between Iraq and Niger, are in fact not
do this smart. Numerous French words were misspelled in the documents.
We believe in Jackson.
One of the letters was signed by a Niger official who had left office 10 years ago. Several dates in the documents did not match the day of the week.
So they just get to get away with this.
The titles of officials mentioned in the documents
Nobody wants that.
incorrect.
Yeah, but that's what's
We all know
happening.
That the documentation on yellowcake from Niger was fake.
What if we get hit by hunters again?
Is this you talking or is this her?
That's a valid point.
And why don't we?
If it were you or me, Joel would be halfway to Seattle already.
That was prevailing at that moment.
Absolutely fucking would be.
Well, we don't even know for certain that they're from Seattle.
Washington Liberation Front. That's what you said was on those patches.
What if they stole those jackets?
At that point,
That's a WLF move.
What are you doing?
Putting this intelligence out there and why? And I don't think that question's been answered, and maybe because the answer is known.
You know what?
It's not a pleasant one.
Who was it that asked for this review
I'm leaving tomorrow.
of the Niger nuclear material question?
And if you want to come with me, great.
Mr. Wilson, former ambassador, was sent to Niger in response to the vice
You have
president's
no idea
questions
what you're
about
walking
this
into.
issue. So assumedly,
You
the
don't know
vice
how
president
large
got a
that group
report
is,
back in
how
response to
armed.
this
I don't
question, and that
care.
report contained the Wilson memo.
You can't talk me out of this.
The question remains, who did the document? Who forged the document? And why? The list is possibly short. Somebody ought to be able to work on that. Wilson says his family is the subject of a smear campaign by senior administration officials. They deliberately leaked his wife's identity as a covert CIA operative, damaging her future career and compromising past missions. After
Gotta be some folks you can spare.
On Meet the Press and in the New York Times.
She won't budge.
The White House hatchet came out and started writing articles in which they basically said that Wilson, the first one said that Wilson told the truth because he's a Democrat.
Please.
They'll set that up as an argument. Democrats tell the truth, ergo Republicans fill in the blank. Then a couple of senior administration officials leaked to Bob Novak that my wife was a CIA operative involved in the weapons of mass destruction business at the CIA.
Senior administration officials is a key to being very, typically the president, vice president, cabinet officers, and the top of the White House. They've gone out of their way to get that information out. Not only told Novak, told Time magazine, they wanted that information out. Now, that's against a statutory law that prohibits the identification of CIA operatives.
What you're doing when you expose a CIA officer of any name, you're basically taking their entire career and flushing it down the toilet.
Also has the potential of placing that person in jeopardy because of their operations and their own operations and people they have operated with in jeopardy. So it's a very vengeful act against the ambassador. I have hurt him by hurting his wife's career, if not wishing her physical damage. I have never seen a dirty trick that could be a hit.
President of the United States and an administration who has come to office on a platform of restoring dignity and honor to the White House. What they did was neither dignified nor was it terribly honorable, nor was it
stop at his house before we leave. I just have to pick something up. I couldn't get to the horses. Looks like Tommy took them. Now Maria's got the stables locked down. Fucking Tommy.
You noted that Cole Powell's speech to the United Nations was theater. A masterful theater, effective theater at the time. Here's a man who has tremendous credibility, who presents himself to the Security Council, to the American people, to the international public, and stares the camera in the eye and says, he knows Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not enough.
My first visual impression here, watching George Tenet, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, back there as a prop, almost like a potted plant, as if to say that the Central Intelligence Agency stands behind everything that Colin Powell says. That was a terrific blow to the morale of the Central Intelligence Agency analysts.
Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons.
Chemical weapons, although they can be very deadly in a subway station like this, are not really strategic weapons. They are weapons that can kill 50, 100, 200 people, but in fact they won't devastate you the way a nuclear weapon in New York City or Chicago or someplace would be a deadly blow.
Saddam Hussein has used these horrific weapons on another country and on his own people.
He used weapons Saddam Hussein did back in the 1980s when the U.S. administration, the Reagan administration, was actually supporting him and allowing him to import the chemical precursors for that.
What do you need?
Rumsfeld actually was a special envoy for Ronald Reagan back in those years, helped open the door for better relations between Washington and Baghdad.
Colin Powell spoke of thousands of liters of anthrax that were unaccounted for. He said they're probably hiding it. Then he held up a little vial of white powder.
I'll hang out down here.
And he said, a couple of teaspoonfuls of white powder like this, if launched against American cities, could kill thousands of Americans. If he was truly to reflect the Iraqi capability, he would have held up a bottle of Diet Coke and said the Iraqis produced anthrax that looked like this. It has a shelf life of 3 years. The last known production batch came out in 1991. So even if Iraq was hiding this brown sludge liquid, it would be useless today.
Just a few weeks ago, we intercepted communications between two commanders in Iraq's 2nd Republican Guard Corps.
If you know anything about Iraq, they have very strict communication security procedures. So you would never have military personnel speaking in the clear over a radio about sensitive subjects.
On the left is a close-up of one of the 4 chemical bunkers.
There were never any chemical weapons in that facility. I'm intimately familiar with that facility. I've inspected it a number of times. Other inspectors have inspected it many more times than I have.
To believe they were proof is to believe the statement that Iraq would put its crown jewels in the one building or one of the few buildings that either the United States will bomb first or the inspectors will go to first.
The truck you also see is a signature item. It's a decontamination vehicle.
The UN weapons inspectors knew that the trucks shown by Colin Powell in those photographs were fire trucks, not decontamination trucks.
I would have to comment here on Secretary of State Colin Powell's debut as an imagery analyst. It was highly embarrassing for those of us who know something about the business. We couldn't tell whether this was an honest mistake by those who now do the imagery analysis, who now report to the Secretary of Defense, unlike our day when they reported to the Central Intelligence Agency, whether that was the case or whether perhaps Colin Powell was being set up.
From our point of view, we do all kinds of analysis of satellite imagery. You can't form any conclusions on what's going on inside the building. They could have been building tractors. They could have been doing nothing inside that facility.
Now look at the picture on the right. You are now looking at 2 of those sanitized bunkers. The signature vehicle.
Everything okay?
It's been cleaned up, and it was done on the 22nd of December as the UN inspection team was arriving.
Contamination vehicles, they rotate from site to site, and so the absence of the vehicle on the second photo, which we know is the 22nd of December, could just as easily be explained by the normal rotation, because you didn't tell us the date of the first, and it was several weeks before.
We have noted that the 2 satellite images of the site were taken several weeks apart. The reported movement of munitions at the site could just as easily have been a routine activity as a
Maria,
movement of
I'm
prescribed
headed to
munitions
Seattle.
in anticipation
I
of
wish I
imminent
could let it
inspection.
go, but I can't.
We have first-hand descriptions.
I have to bring these people to
Biological
justice.
weapons factories on
Ellie's
wheels.
going to try to come after me,
rail.
but stop
These
her.
mobile labs that you have shown to be
Take her
nothing more
guns,
than hydrogen
lock up the
generation
horses,
facilities.
maybe
Here
lock
you see
her up.
both truck and rail car mounted mobile
Buy me some
factories.
time so I can
When
end
you take a
this.
look at the mobile labs
Love you
that
always,
Colin Powell
Tommy.
discussed, he didn't put up photographs.
He's gonna get
of
himself
the facilities.
killed.
He put up
He should have taken me
artist
with
depictions
him.
of these facilities. Why? Because we have
You
no
should have
proof
given
they
us a group
exist.
to go after those fuckers.
Wish I could.
Obtained by
You guys try to lock me up?
I prefer that you stay.
That's not gonna fucking
I
happen.
prefer that you stay, but I know you better.
Note the spray
You going with her?
coming from beneath the
Yeah.
garage. That is 2,000 liters.
You're just gonna
of
sneak
simulated
out of here.
anthrax.
Yeah. On foot?
Iraqis continue to visit bin Laden in his new home in Afghanistan.
George Tenet's analysts had spent a year and a half of torturous
Here's what the state will
investigation,
let you out. It's
torturous
yours.
analysis, to see if there were ties between Al-Qaeda and Iraq.
Grab some ammo
Found
too.
none.
Our conservative estimate is that Iraq today has a stockpile of between
Thank you,
100
Maria.
and 500 tons of chemical weapons agent.
So the Secretary
Just,
of State is telling us that
do me a favor.
our conservative estimate
Bring my
is that
dumbass
Iraq
husband home in one
possesses
piece,
between
please.
100 and 500 tons of chemical weapons agent,
Of course.
enough to fill 16,000
All right.
warheads on the battlefield.
Get going, you're losing
Or-
night.
What happened to them? My suspicion is that this is not our conservative estimate, that this sounds very much to me like our neo-conservative estimate.
Iraqi denials of supporting terrorism take their place alongside the other Iraqi denials of weapons of mass destruction. It is all a web of lies.
It was a masterful performance, but none of it was true. Where are all these weapons? Where is all this VX? Where is all the anthrax?
Probably one of the low points in his long distinguished service to the nation.
This Hunter was on top of him, drowning him.
They concealed, denied, deceived,
Return
Joel couldn't get to his gun.
no assurance whatsoever.
Jeez.
eliminate by inspection.
Were you scared?
Fool's
Well,
errand.
On the contrary,
think
there's a great
just-
danger that it would provide false comfort that
Just
Saddam
ran in
was
there, grabbed
somehow
his gun, and
back in his box.
shot the man in the face.
Reality is
How old were you?
that between the original
14?
Hunscom inspections
How old were you when
and
you
the
first got
unloaded
someone?
inspections,
What are you talking?
you
Infected?
destroyed with those
No.
inspections 90
Fully conscious.
95%
One
of
phone
the
call person.
The first Gulf War destroyed almost nothing.
What
And,
happened?
you know, post-war
Guy was
years
coming to my
back
mom.
assessments
I stabbed
confirmed
him.
The weapons
Shit.
inspectors were effective,
You got me beat.
forced Saddam,
Yeah,
this
I'm
stuff.
gonna do that next.
They had that country under
So how
control.
lost are we?
1998 at the latest, those inspectors
Very.
had
Uh-huh.
discovered
Hey,
most of the weapons of mass destruction and the
what about those
Iraqi
crazy
programs
cannibals you said you and Joel
at
went
that
into?
point were essentially
They came
at
after you
an
guys
end
once.
before the
Maybe
war.
these WLFs are connected to them.
The United Nations
No.
inspectors told us
Didn't seem like the same group.
that
Maybe
Saddam
those black
Hussein
market smugglers back in Boston?
did not
Did
have
not.
nuclear weapons capability.
Joel crossed a lot of
Ironically,
people.
the major
I don't see the point of
effect
guessing.
of the invasion
Okay.
of Iraq,
At least until we find out more information.
weapons of mass destruction, has been to show that the inspectors were right all along.
The inspection regime worked. It was the most intrusive inspection regime in history, and it worked. And at the end of the day, that's another reason why we
Ellie,
want to work on
cars. Yeah, we're getting close. Start keeping an eye out. Go.
These maniacs who are encouraging our enemies, weakening our troops'
Here we
resolve,
go.
and confusing the American people.
Guess I was wrong. Turns out you do know where you're going.
Saddam Hussein. Who would have guessed that you could build a massive international peace movement on the protection of Saddam Hussein?
The media is culpable for the misleading of the American public. They bought into the Bush administration's rhetoric.
They don't understand that there is moral violence and immoral violence. We use moral violence. God bless this president. He is truly a great man. Reducing troop morale, confusing the American people, and emboldening our enemies. They are absolutely committing sedition or treason as far as I'm concerned. There's a huge difference between a personal opinion and an opinion which degrades and debases our military in a time of war. It's a disgrace.
I don't believe that mainstream media acted responsibly in regards to that. You know, I was belittled. I was called a traitor. I was called crazy. All the time was chewed in, accused me of drinking some everything.
Sure seems quiet.
After statements and responsible women and foods.
Think about how well we hide our lookouts.
Drinking Saddam Hussein's cool.
I'm an
That's
ideologue.
what scares me.
That I'm a Republican ideologue. I'm actually a fairly conservative person who voted for George W. Bush. But I don't allow my ideology to get in the way of the facts and the reality of my duties and responsibilities as an American citizen.
Kill the message to go after the messenger. You can discredit the messenger, then you can discredit the message, or if you can make the story about the messenger, then people forget about the message.
I think it's so unfair to try to silence debate and
Wow.
criticism
Except the
by
QZ.
attacking those who say something that you disagree
Watch the high
The media is
spots.
supposed to be the fourth estate.
WLF.
Completely
Trespassers
contradicts
killed on
administration
sight.
on this.
In a way, the
That's
administration constructed a
At least we know
box,
we're in the right place.
and that box
Where
had
is
all the
everyone?
information that the
They put up
administration
this sign.
wanted the media.
Means there's gotta be a way in.
What they would do is you'd have the Iraqi National Congress taking bogus defectors, the information from them, giving them to the Pentagon. And then the Iraqi
Look like
National
there's no
Congress,
practice
then giving them
in
to
the
the
wall up
journalists.
above.
And they said, if you don't believe us, the Iraqi National Congress, call the Pentagon. So you had this circular reporting. And you had the New York Times admitting that it was using one source for all of its information on weapons of mass destruction. And it was, self-affirming by going to the Pentagon, which put this stuff on paper.
Anything good in there? Found an old tourist map.
Exaggerations,
Well,
partial information,
that's
sometimes the whole information, but on balance, a very one-sided view of Iraq's WMD program.
And a lot of these stories the journalists didn't want to look into because editors told them to run with. We're going to be supportive of the administration. It's a patriotic thing to do.
I think that there was, on the part of the media, too much of, in a sense, giving in to the upcoming war and not enough to look at do we really need to go?
There were some journalists out there raising the alarm bells. The Seymour Hirsch's, the Walter Pincus's. But unfortunately, those great investigative reporters, they're usually exiled when the heat is on. And it's only after the fact that they end up being praised and given the pats on the back.
The excitement was to make the case to go to war. To show that, and that was the controversy of the media loved. It was the titillation of a WMD hitting, not the titillation or the conflict mechanism.
Local one, very conservative and supported White House.
I didn't foresee all of this. I'd like to say all I was very prescient. I knew what the others in the intelligence community were saying. I didn't. And I'm one of the ones who also, I drank the Kool-Aid. But early on, I felt that there were some real dangers going into the war. I tried to get an op-ed into various major newspapers.
Dina, help me up here.
Nobody
Okay.
wants to hear this because we're going to war.
I'll keep an eye out. Just see if you can get the gate open from the other side. Sounds good.
States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that
fucking
threatens
going
the
out
peace
like
with weapons of mass murder.
This regime has an active program to acquire and develop nuclear weapons, and that there's no doubt about it.
Whoa.
We know for a fact.
Oh, Jesus.
There were a group of people who, for many years, had advocated going after Saddam Hussein. And they pushed this hard.